Riley Thompson had always believed that high school social hierarchies were more rigid than medieval caste systems, and that crossing between different levels of popularity was about as likely as spontaneous combustion. As a junior at Westfield High, Riley occupied a comfortable position in the academic achievers category, somewhere between the debate team captains and the honor roll regulars, far removed from the glittering stratosphere where star athletes and their admirers held court. Riley preferred it that way. The world of academic competitions, science fairs, and college prep courses was predictable, merit-based, and free from the drama and superficiality that seemed to define the popular crowd. Riley had a close-knit group of friends who shared similar interests, maintained a near-perfect GPA, and was already planning college applications with the kind of strategic precision that guidance counselors praised in their recommendation letters. But on a gray Tuesday morning in November, Riley's carefully ordered world collided with forces beyond any individual student's control when Mrs. Patterson, the head of the tutoring program, called Riley into her office with an expression that suggested both urgency and apology. "Riley," Mrs. Patterson began, settling behind her desk with a folder that appeared to contain official documentation. "I have an unusual request that I hope you'll consider seriously, even though it's going to disrupt your current tutoring schedule." Riley shifted uncomfortably in the plastic chair, already sensing that this conversation was heading in a direction that would complicate the neat academic routine that had been working so well. What kind of request? Mrs. Patterson opened the folder and consulted what appeared to be grade reports and administrative notes. "We have a student who needs intensive tutoring in calculus and chemistry, and you're the only tutor available who has the necessary expertise in both subjects and the schedule flexibility to meet his needs." Riley felt a flicker of pride at being recognized as the go-to tutor for advanced subjects, but also wariness about taking on a student who apparently needed intensive help in two challenging courses. "What's his current situation academically?" "He's failing both classes," Mrs. Patterson admitted with the kind of directness that suggested she was trying to prepare Riley for a challenging assignment. "His grades have dropped significantly this semester, and if he doesn't bring them up to at least a C average by the end of the quarter, he'll be academically ineligible for spring sports." Riley nodded, understanding the implications but still not grasping why this particular case required special handling. Plenty of students struggled with advanced math and science courses, and the tutoring program regularly handled academic crisis situations. "The complicating factor," Mrs. Patterson continued, "is that this student is Ethan Marcus, the starting quarterback for our football team. His academic situation is politically sensitive given the importance of the football program to our school's reputation and community standing." Riley felt a sinking sensation as the pieces of this conversation came together. Ethan Marcus was not just any struggling student. He was the golden boy of Westfield High, the star athlete whose performances on Friday nights drew crowds from across the county, and whose college recruiting process was being followed by local newspapers like a soap opera. "Mrs. Patterson," Riley said carefully, "I appreciate that you think I'm qualified to help, but I'm not sure I'm the right tutor for someone like Ethan. We don't exactly move in the same social circles, and I'm not sure he'd be comfortable working with me." Mrs. Patterson leaned forward with the kind of earnest expression that suggested she had anticipated this objection. "Riley, you're the best math and science tutor in our program, and Ethan needs the best help available if he's going to salvage his grades this semester. His football success has unfortunately overshadowed his academic struggles for too long, and now we're facing a crisis that requires serious intervention." Riley considered this explanation, recognizing the logic but still feeling reluctant to take on a tutoring assignment that would inevitably involve navigating social dynamics that were far outside Riley's comfort zone. Ethan Marcus existed in a completely different universe at Westfield High, surrounded by admirers and teammates, and the kind of social privileges that came with athletic stardom. "What exactly would this tutoring arrangement involve?" Riley asked, hoping that the logistics might be manageable even if the social aspects were complicated. "Intensive sessions 3 times a week, focusing on current coursework and exam preparation," Mrs. Patterson replied, consulting her notes. "The sessions would need to be scheduled around Ethan's practice schedule, which means some evening and weekend availability would be required." Riley mentally calculated the time commitment and its impact on other academic obligations. 3 intensive tutoring sessions per week would significantly reduce study time and limit participation in other activities, but the tutoring program paid well enough to make the sacrifice financially worthwhile. "Has Ethan agreed to this arrangement?" Riley asked, suddenly wondering whether the star quarterback was any more enthusiastic about the pairing than Riley felt. Mrs. Patterson hesitated slightly before answering, a pause that suggested this aspect of the situation was also complicated. "Ethan understands that his academic situation is serious, and he's committed to doing whatever is necessary to bring his grades up. He may need some time to adjust to working with a new tutor, but he's motivated by the prospect of maintaining his athletic eligibility." Riley interpreted this diplomatic response as confirmation that Ethan was probably no more excited about their pairing than Riley was, but that both of them were being pressured by circumstances beyond their control to make the arrangement work. "When would this tutoring assignment begin?" Riley asked, already mentally preparing for the disruption to established routines and social comfort zones. Immediately, Mrs. Patterson replied, "Ethan's next calculus exam is scheduled for Friday, and his chemistry test is the following Monday. We need to begin intensive preparation right away if there's any hope of improving his performance significantly." Riley took a deep breath, recognizing that this was one of those moments when refusing a challenge might be the comfortable choice but not necessarily the right choice. The tutoring program had given Riley valuable experience and income over the past 2 years, and turning down a difficult assignment would reflect poorly on commitment and professional reliability. "Okay," Riley said finally, "I'll take the assignment. But I want it understood that I'm going to focus entirely on academics, and I expect Ethan to take the tutoring seriously rather than treating it as a social obligation." Mrs. Patterson smiled with obvious relief. "Thank you, Riley. I think you'll find that Ethan is more serious about his education than his public image might suggest. And who knows, this assignment might be beneficial for both of you in ways that go beyond academics." Riley left Mrs. Patterson's office with mixed feelings about the new tutoring assignment and its potential impact on the carefully balanced routine that had been working so well. Tutoring Ethan Marcus would require navigating social dynamics and expectations that were completely foreign to Riley's usual academic environment. But as Riley walked through the hallways of Westfield High, observing the clear social boundaries that separated different groups of students, there was also a curious anticipation about what it might be like to interact with someone from such a different world. Riley had always been curious about whether the popular students were actually as different as they seemed, or whether the social barriers were more superficial than substantial. The first tutoring session was scheduled for that evening in the library's quiet study rooms, neutral territory where both Riley and Ethan could focus on academics without the distractions and social pressures of their usual environments. Riley spent the rest of the day preparing materials and lesson plans with the same methodical attention to detail that had made previous tutoring assignments successful. Whatever this experience turned out to be, Riley was determined to approach it with professionalism and high standards, treating Ethan Marcus like any other student who needed academic help, rather than getting distracted by his celebrity status or social position. Riley had no way of knowing that this tutoring assignment would challenge not only academic abilities, but also assumptions about popularity, authenticity, and the possibility of genuine connection between people from completely different social worlds. Chapter 2, First Impression. Riley arrived at the library 15 minutes early, as was customary for any important appointment, and spent the time organizing tutoring materials and reviewing Ethan's academic records to understand the specific areas where intervention would be most necessary. The study room was small but well equipped, with a whiteboard, comfortable seating, and the kind of quiet atmosphere that facilitated focused learning. Ethan Marcus arrived exactly on time, which surprised Riley, given the popular stereotype about athletes being casual with scheduling and commitments. He appeared in the doorway looking slightly uncertain, as if he wasn't entirely sure he was in the right place, or knew what was expected of him in this unfamiliar academic setting. Riley's first impression was that Ethan looked different outside of his usual context of football uniforms and hallway crowds. He was still tall and athletic, with the kind of confidence that came from years of physical achievement, but without his usual entourage of teammates and admirers. He seemed more approachable and less intimidating than Riley had expected. "You must be Riley," Ethan said, entering the study room with a tentative smile. "Thanks for agreeing to help me out. I know this probably wasn't your first choice for how to spend your evenings." Riley was struck by Ethan's directness and apparent awareness that the tutoring arrangement might be inconvenient for both of them. "It's fine," Riley replied, gesturing for Ethan to take a seat at the study table. "Mrs. Patterson said you're having trouble with calculus and chemistry, so I thought we'd start by figuring out exactly where you are in both subjects and what specific concepts are causing the most difficulty." Ethan settled into his chair and pulled out textbooks and notebooks that appeared to be well used but disorganized, with loose papers and incomplete assignments scattered throughout. Riley noted that while Ethan clearly had been attending classes and taking notes, his study materials lacked the systematic organization that typically supported academic success. "I have to be honest," Ethan said, opening his calculus textbook to a page covered with erased work and frustrated scribbles. "I've never been great at math, and this year's material is completely beyond anything I've encountered before. I can memorize formulas and follow examples, but when I try to solve problems on my own, it's like my brain just shuts down." Riley appreciated Ethan's honesty about his academic struggles, which was a much more promising starting point than defensive excuses or blame directed at teachers or course difficulty. "That's actually a common experience with calculus. The concepts build on each other in ways that make it easy to get lost if you miss fundamental understanding earlier in the course." Riley pulled out a diagnostic worksheet that would help identify specific gaps in Ethan's mathematical foundation. "Let's start with some basic problems that will show me how you approach problem solving and where you might need additional support." As Ethan worked through the diagnostic problems, Riley observed his thought processes and study habits, looking for patterns that might explain his academic difficulties. Ethan was clearly intelligent and capable of understanding complex concepts when they were explained clearly, but he lacked confidence in his own abilities and tended to second-guess himself when facing challenging material. "You're actually doing better than you think," Riley observed after reviewing Ethan's work on the diagnostic problems. "Your understanding of basic concepts is solid, but you're getting tripped up by overthinking and anxiety rather than fundamental knowledge gaps." Ethan looked up with surprise, apparently not accustomed to positive feedback about his academic performance. "Really? Because I feel like I'm completely lost most of the time in both classes." Riley spread Ethan's work across the table, pointing out examples of correct reasoning and problem-solving approaches that demonstrated his capabilities. "Look at this derivative problem. You set it up correctly, applied the right rules, and got the correct answer, but then you erased it and tried a completely different approach because you didn't trust yourself." Ethan studied his own work with the kind of analytical attention that suggested he was genuinely interested in understanding his academic patterns, rather than simply getting through the tutoring session. "I guess I've gotten so used to feeling stupid in these classes that I assume I'm wrong even when I'm right." Riley felt a pang of sympathy for Ethan's academic insecurity, recognizing that confidence played a huge role in mathematical success and that negative self-perception could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Confidence is actually a major component of success in advanced math and science. When you doubt yourself constantly, you're more likely to make careless mistakes and less likely to trust your instincts about problem-solving approaches. They spent the rest of the first session working through calculus problems together, with Riley demonstrating techniques for building confidence and checking work systematically. Ethan proved to be an attentive student who asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely grateful for clear explanations and encouragement. "This actually makes sense when you explain it like that," Ethan said as they reviewed techniques for optimization problems. "My teacher goes through examples so quickly that I never have time to understand the reasoning behind each step." Riley noted that Ethan's learning style appeared to benefit from step-by-step explanations and opportunities to practice concepts in a supportive environment where mistakes were treated as learning opportunities rather than failures. Different students need different pacing and explanation styles. There's nothing wrong with needing more time to process complex material. As their first session came to an end, Riley felt cautiously optimistic about the tutoring arrangement. Ethan was respectful, motivated, and more academically capable than his grades suggested. The main challenges would be building his confidence and helping him develop study strategies that supported his learning style. "When's our next session?" Ethan asked, packing up his materials with noticeably better organization than when he had arrived. "Thursday evening, same time," Riley replied. "I want you to practice the problems we worked on tonight, and don't erase your work if you think it's wrong. We'll review everything together and figure out where your reasoning is solid and where you might need additional support." Ethan paused at the door of the study room, turning back with an expression that seemed to combine gratitude with something else that Riley couldn't quite identify. "Thanks for not making me feel like an idiot. Most people just assume that because I'm good at football, I must be stupid at everything else." Riley felt surprised by this comment, realizing that Ethan's experience of academic struggle had probably been complicated by social expectations and stereotypes about athletes. Intelligence comes in many different forms, and athletic ability requires its own kind of strategic thinking and problem solving. There's no reason you can't be successful in multiple areas. As Ethan left the library, Riley reflected on the first tutoring session and its implications for the weeks ahead. Ethan Marcus was more complex and thoughtful than Riley had expected, and his academic challenges seemed to stem more from confidence issues and learning style mismatches than from any fundamental inability to master difficult material. Riley began to understand that this tutoring assignment might be more interesting and rewarding than originally anticipated, offering the opportunity to help someone overcome both academic obstacles and social prejudices that had been limiting his educational success. The next session would focus on chemistry, which presented different challenges and would give Riley a more complete picture of Ethan's academic strengths and areas for improvement. But based on their first interaction, Riley felt confident that they could work together effectively despite their different backgrounds and social positions at Westfield High. Chapter 3: Breaking Down Barriers. Thursday's chemistry tutoring session took place in the same quiet study room, but the atmosphere felt more relaxed than their first meeting. Ethan arrived with his materials better organized and an expression that suggested greater confidence about the academic work ahead. Riley had prepared a diagnostic assessment for chemistry similar to the one used for calculus, designed to identify specific areas where Ethan needed the most support. "Chemistry's actually been harder for me than calculus," Ethan admitted as he settled into his chair. "At least with math, the problems have clear right and wrong answers. Chemistry feels like there are all these invisible rules that everyone else somehow knows but nobody ever explains explicitly." Riley understood this frustration, recognizing that chemistry required a different type of thinking that combined mathematical calculations with conceptual understanding of atomic and molecular behavior. Chemistry can be challenging because it requires you to visualize things you can't see and understand processes that happen at a scale that's completely outside normal human experience. As Ethan worked through the chemistry diagnostic problems, Riley observed that his struggles were different from those in calculus. While his mathematical calculations were generally correct, He had difficulty understanding the underlying chemical concepts that gave meaning to the equations and formulas. Let's start with atomic structure, Riley suggested, pulling out a molecular model kit that made abstract concepts more concrete and visual. Instead of memorizing formulas, let's build some molecules and talk about why atoms behave the way they do. Ethan's face lit up with interest as Riley demonstrated how to use the molecular models to represent different compounds and chemical reactions. For the first time since they had begun working together, he seemed to engage with the material on an intuitive level rather than simply trying to memorize rules and procedures. This is so much easier to understand when I can actually see what's happening, Ethan said, assembling a water molecule and examining how the hydrogen and oxygen atoms connected. Why don't teachers use these models more often in class? Different students have different learning styles, Riley explained, watching Ethan experiment with building more complex molecules. Some people learn best through visual representations, others through mathematical equations, and still others through hands-on manipulation like this. The trick is figuring out which approach works best for you. As they worked through chemistry concepts using the molecular models, Riley noticed that Ethan's understanding improved dramatically when he could connect abstract theories to concrete representations. He began asking more sophisticated questions about chemical bonding, reaction mechanisms, and the relationship between molecular structure and chemical properties. You know, Ethan said during a brief break between topics, this is the first time in either of these classes that I felt like I actually understood what was going on, rather than just trying to guess my way through assignments. Riley felt pleased by this progress but also curious about Ethan's broader academic experience. Have you always had trouble with science and math, or is this year particularly challenging? Ethan considered the question thoughtfully before responding. I think I've always been okay at memorizing information and following instructions, but I've never been good at understanding why things work the way they do. Most of my teachers seem to assume that everyone already knows the basic concepts, so they move through material really quickly, without checking whether students are actually following the logic. Riley recognized this as a common problem in advanced courses, where teachers often focused on covering curriculum requirements, rather than ensuring that all students had mastered foundational concepts. It sounds like you learn best when you can understand the reasoning behind formulas and procedures, rather than just memorizing them. Exactly, Ethan agreed with obvious relief at being understood. When I understand why something works, I can remember it, and apply it to new situations. But when I just memorize rules without understanding them, I forget everything as soon as the test is over. This insight helped Riley develop a more effective tutoring strategy that emphasized conceptual understanding and logical reasoning, rather than rote memorization. They spent the remainder of the session working through chemistry problems that built systematically from basic concepts to more complex applications, with Ethan demonstrating steady improvement in both understanding and confidence. I have a question that's not about chemistry, Ethan said as they finished reviewing balancing chemical equations. Why did you agree to tutor me? I mean, I know Mrs. Patterson probably put pressure on you, but you could have said no. Riley paused, considering how to answer honestly without sounding condescending or overly altruistic. I like helping people understand difficult concepts, and you seemed genuinely motivated to improve your grades rather than just looking for someone to do your work for you. But weren't you worried about what people would think? Ethan pressed. I mean, we don't exactly run in the same social circles, and some people might have opinions about you spending time with someone from the football team. Riley found this question interesting, partly because it suggested that Ethan was aware of social boundaries and their potential impact on both of their reputations. I don't really care what people think about my tutoring assignments. My friends know that I take academics seriously, and they respect that I'm good at helping other students succeed. Ethan nodded slowly, as if he were processing not just Riley's answer, but the confidence and independence it reflected. That's really cool that you can just focus on what you think is right without worrying about social pressure. I feel like I'm constantly thinking about how my choices might affect my reputation or my position on the team. This comment gave Riley insight into the pressures and constraints that came with Ethan's social position at Westfield High. While popularity brought privileges and attention, it also created expectations and limitations that Riley had never considered. Is that why you've been struggling academically? Riley asked gently. Because you've been focused on maintaining your athletic and social responsibilities rather than your coursework? Ethan was quiet for several moments before answering, apparently debating how much to share about his personal situation. Partly, yeah. Football takes up a huge amount of time and energy, and there's always pressure to attend social events and maintain relationships with teammates and other popular students. But honestly, I think the bigger problem is that I've never learned how to study effectively. Riley felt surprised by this admission, having assumed that someone who had made it through high school would have developed basic study skills through trial and error if not through formal instruction. What do you mean you've never learned how to study? Riley asked, genuinely curious about Ethan's educational background. I've always been able to get by with minimal effort in most classes, Ethan explained.
Teachers tend to give athletes some extra flexibility with deadlines and grading, and I've gotten used to doing just enough work to maintain eligibility rather than actually mastering the material. Riley began to understand that Ethan's academic struggles might be the result of systemic problems rather than individual limitations. If he had been allowed to coast through previous courses without developing strong study habits, the advanced material in calculus and chemistry would naturally present significant challenges. The good news is that study skills can be learned at any point, Riley assured him. We can work on developing effective strategies alongside the specific course content. As they concluded their second tutoring session, Riley felt that they had made significant progress, not only in chemistry but also in understanding each other's perspectives and motivations. Ethan was more thoughtful and self-aware than Riley had expected, and his academic struggles seemed to stem from correctable problems rather than fundamental limitations. Same time Saturday morning for our next session? Riley asked, packing up the molecular models and chemistry materials. Definitely, Ethan replied with enthusiasm that seemed genuine rather than polite. And Riley, thanks for treating me like a normal student instead of making a big deal about the football stuff. That means more than you probably realize. As Riley walked home from the library, there was a growing sense that this tutoring arrangement might be beneficial for both of them in ways that went beyond academics. Ethan was challenging Riley's assumptions about popular students and social hierarchies, while Riley was apparently helping Ethan develop confidence and skills that had been missing from his educational experience. Riley was beginning to look forward to their next session with curiosity about what other surprises Ethan Marcus might reveal as they continued working together. Chapter 4. Unexpected depth. Saturday morning's tutoring session took place during a time when the library was nearly empty, creating an atmosphere of quiet focus that allowed for deeper concentration and more personal conversation. Riley had prepared review materials for both calculus and chemistry, planning to assess Ethan's progress and identify areas that needed additional attention before his upcoming exams. Ethan arrived carrying coffee for both of them, a thoughtful gesture that suggested he was viewing their tutoring relationship as a collaborative partnership rather than a one-sided academic service. Riley accepted the coffee gratefully, recognizing that small acts of consideration could make their work together more pleasant and productive. I've been practicing the problems you assigned, Ethan said, pulling out homework that was noticeably better organized than his previous work. I think I'm starting to understand the pattern recognition part of calculus, but I'm still struggling with some of the chemistry concepts we covered Thursday. Riley reviewed Ethan's practice work, noting significant improvement in his mathematical reasoning and problem-solving approach. His calculus homework showed fewer careless errors and more systematic thinking, suggesting that their previous sessions were having a positive impact on his academic performance. This is really good work, Riley observed, pointing out specific examples of improved reasoning. You're showing much more confidence in your answers, and your work is more organized and easier to follow.
Ethan seemed pleased by this feedback, but also somewhat surprised, as if he wasn't accustomed to receiving positive recognition for academic achievement. It's weird how much difference it makes to actually understand what I'm doing instead of just following formulas blindly. They spent the first hour of their session working through challenging calculus problems that would be similar to those on Ethan's upcoming exam. Riley was impressed by how quickly Ethan was absorbing new concepts and applying them to novel situations, demonstrating the kind of analytical thinking that suggested strong underlying intelligence. "Can I ask you something personal?" Ethan said during a break between math topics. "What made you decide to focus so much on academics? I mean, you're obviously really smart, but there are lots of smart people who don't work as hard as you do." Riley considered this question, recognizing that it reflected genuine curiosity about different approaches to high school and future planning. "I guess I've always found learning intrinsically interesting, and I like the feeling of mastering challenging material. Plus, academic success is my pathway to the kind of college and career opportunities that will give me independence and choices about my future." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, as if he were considering perspectives on education and achievement that differed significantly from his own experience. "I've never really thought about learning as something interesting in itself. For me, school has always been something you have to get through in order to do the things you actually want to do." "What do you actually want to do?" Riley asked, realizing that despite several tutoring sessions together, they had never discussed Ethan's goals or aspirations beyond maintaining athletic eligibility. Ethan was quiet for several moments, apparently considering how to answer honestly. "That's actually a really hard question. Everyone assumes I want to play college football and maybe go professional if I'm good enough. But honestly, I'm not sure that's what I want for myself." Riley felt surprised by this admission, having assumed that Ethan's athletic success would naturally translate into clear goals and ambitions related to football. "What makes you uncertain about pursuing football at the college level?" "I love playing," Ethan explained, "but I'm not sure I love everything that comes with being a football player. The pressure, the expectations, the way people treat you like you're not a complete person outside of your athletic ability. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be known for something else." Riley found this perspective fascinating, realizing that athletic success came with its own set of limitations and pressures that were invisible to those outside the sports world. "Have you ever talked to anyone about these concerns?" Ethan shook his head. "Who would I talk to? My parents are thrilled about my football success and the college recruitment attention. My coaches obviously want me to pursue athletics as far as possible, And my teammates would probably think I was crazy for questioning something that most of them would give anything to achieve. Riley felt sympathy for Ethan's isolation around these important life decisions. Understanding that his social position made it difficult to express doubts or explore alternative paths without facing pressure and criticism from multiple directions. What would you want to pursue if football wasn't a factor? Riley asked, genuinely curious about Ethan's interests and aspirations outside of athletics. Ethan looked slightly embarrassed before answering. This is going to sound weird, but I've always been interested in environmental science and conservation. I love being outdoors, and I'm fascinated by ecology and the way different natural systems interact with each other. Riley felt no surprise at this revelation, recognizing that intelligence and curiosity could manifest in many different areas regardless of someone's public image or social role. That doesn't sound weird at all. Environmental science is a really important field, and it requires exactly the kind of systems thinking and problem-solving skills that you've been developing in our tutoring sessions. Ethan's expression brightened with something that looked like relief and validation. You really think so? I've never mentioned this interest to anyone because it seems so different from the image people have of me as a football player. Being multidimensional is a strength, not a weakness, Riley assured him. Some of the most successful people I know have diverse interests and skills that complement each other in unexpected ways. They spent the remainder of their tutoring session working on chemistry problems, but Riley noticed that Ethan seemed more engaged and motivated when they discussed topics that connected to environmental applications of chemical principles. His understanding improved noticeably when he could see how abstract concepts related to real-world environmental challenges. You know, Riley observed as they worked through a problem about chemical reactions in natural water systems, if you're interested in environmental science, chemistry, and calculus are exactly the kinds of foundational courses that would prepare you for advanced study in that field. Ethan looked up from his work with an expression of surprise and growing excitement. I never thought about these classes as preparation for something I actually cared about. I've been thinking of them as obstacles to maintaining football eligibility rather than tools for pursuing my real interests. Riley realized that this shift in perspective might be the key to improving Ethan's academic motivation and performance. When coursework connected to personal interests and future goals, even challenging material became more meaningful and memorable. Maybe we should start incorporating environmental science examples into our tutoring sessions, Riley suggested. It might help you understand and remember concepts better if you can see how they apply to areas you're genuinely interested in. Ethan agreed enthusiastically to this approach, and they spent the final minutes of their session discussing how calculus and chemistry concepts applied to environmental challenges like water pollution, climate change, and ecosystem management. Riley watched Ethan's entire demeanor change as he began to see academic work as relevant to his personal passions rather than simply as requirements to endure. As they concluded their Saturday session, Riley reflected on how much their tutoring relationship had evolved beyond simple academic assistance. They were developing a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared intellectual curiosity, despite coming from very different social backgrounds and having different priorities and pressures. Thanks for listening to me talk about my environmental interests, Ethan said as he packed up his materials. It feels really good to share that with someone who doesn't think it's weird or impractical. Riley felt touched by Ethan's gratitude and trust, recognizing that their conversations had become increasingly personal and meaningful for both of them. Thanks for trusting me with something that's important to you. And Ethan, you should definitely consider pursuing environmental science, regardless of what happens with football. You have the intelligence and passion to succeed in any field that interests you. As Riley walked home from the library, there was a growing sense that the tutoring arrangement was becoming something more significant than either of them had anticipated. They were not only helping each other academically, but also challenging each other's assumptions about social boundaries, personal potential, and the possibility of authentic connections across different worlds. Riley was beginning to understand that the most valuable part of this experience might not be the academic success they were achieving together, but the mutual recognition and respect they were developing as complete, complex individuals rather than social stereotypes. Chapter 5. The Whispered Confession. The week leading up to Ethan's calculus and chemistry exams was intense and focused, with daily tutoring sessions that demonstrated both his improved understanding of the material and his growing confidence in his academic abilities. Riley watched with satisfaction as Ethan tackled complex problems with systematic approaches and thoughtful reasoning, showing none of the anxiety and self-doubt that had characterized their early sessions together. Wednesday evening's tutoring session took place in their usual library study room, but the atmosphere felt different somehow, more charged with anticipation and unspoken emotions that had been building between them over the weeks of intensive academic work and increasingly personal conversations. Riley had prepared final review materials for both subjects but was also aware that this might be their last regular tutoring session if Ethan's exam performance was successful enough to bring his grades up to passing levels. I feel really good about tomorrow's calculus exam, Ethan said, working through practice problems with the kind of confidence that had been absent from his academic work just a month earlier. For the first time in either of these classes, I understand the underlying logic instead of just memorizing procedures. Riley felt proud of Ethan's progress and grateful for the opportunity to witness his transformation from struggling student to confident learner. You've worked really hard to get to this point. Whatever happens on the exams, you should feel good about how much you've grown academically. As they reviewed chemistry concepts for Monday's test, Riley noticed that Ethan seemed more reflective and emotional than usual, as if he were processing not just academic material but also the broader implications of their tutoring relationship and its approaching conclusion. Riley, Ethan said during a pause between topics, I want you to know that working with you has changed more than just my grades. You've helped me understand things about myself and my goals that I never would have discovered otherwise. Riley felt touched by this acknowledgement, but also slightly melancholy about the prospect of returning to their separate social worlds once the intensive tutoring arrangement ended. I'm glad the sessions have been helpful beyond just the academic content. You've taught me things too about different perspectives and experiences that I hadn't considered before. They continued working through chemistry review problems, but Riley could sense that Ethan was building up to saying something more significant. His body language was tense with nervous energy, and he kept glancing at Riley with an expression that suggested internal debate about whether to share whatever was on his mind. As their session drew to a close and they began packing up their materials, Ethan suddenly stopped what he was doing and turned to face Riley directly. There's something I need to tell you before we finish our tutoring arrangement, something I've been thinking about for weeks but haven't had the courage to say. Riley felt a flutter of anticipation and nervousness, sensing that whatever Ethan was about to share would be important and potentially relationship-changing. What is it? Ethan took a deep breath and moved closer, close enough that Riley could see the uncertainty and vulnerability in his expression despite his usual confidence and social composure. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, as if he were afraid that speaking too loudly might break the spell of the moment or make his words too real to take back. I think I'm falling in love with you, Ethan whispered, his eyes searching Riley's face for any sign of reciprocation or rejection. I know we come from different worlds, and I know this complicates everything about our friendship and the tutoring arrangement, but I needed you to know before we go back to being strangers who pass each other in the hallways. Riley felt the world shift around those whispered words, as if everything that had seemed certain and predictable about high school social dynamics had suddenly become fluid and full of unexpected possibilities. The confession was both shocking and somehow inevitable, the logical conclusion of weeks of deepening connection and mutual understanding that had transcended their original academic focus. Ethan, Riley whispered back, heart racing with a mixture of excitement and fear about the implications of acknowledging the feelings that had been growing steadily over their time together. I've been having the same feelings, but I was afraid to admit them because I thought they would complicate everything and maybe ruin our friendship. Ethan's expression transformed with relief and joy, as if he had been prepared for rejection but was overwhelmed by the possibility of reciprocation. Really? You've been thinking about us as more